Okay, hello everybody. Today we're at the OPNFV event in Berlin, and one of the hot topics in the event is orchestration. So what we've got today for you is an example of some orchestration capabilities that we're also looking at introducing into the open orchestration environment. So we'll be looking at these use cases that are very much a target for the open orchestration. So we're at the Huawei stand, and I'd like to give you an overview of the CloudVPN end-to-end NFV and SDN orchestration capability. So the first thing is we're looking at the end-to-end CloudVPN service orchestration. The idea is to create a very agile environment where we can have very dynamic and on-demand services for CloudVPN. The idea of a CloudVPN is that I can turn up, I can connect all of my corporate sites via a VPN service, and then I can deploy new value-added services over that VPN to the corporate sites, and all to be done in a matter of minutes and seconds, with the ability to add and remove value-added services through that. The orchestrator is a key enabler for this. We have, in this picture, we show that we have an end-to-end orchestrator that goes over the network, which shows an integration of two controllers. One of the controllers is over an IP RAN network, and the second controller is looking at an IP core. We also have a VNFM, which is a virtual network function manager, which is taking care of the management of the firewall and the DHCP service. So we're going to provide an overview and a video of this today and how we achieve this in the orchestration. Okay, so let's talk about Lifecycle Service Orchestration. Lifecycle Service Orchestration is the process by which we can introduce a new service offering quickly into the orchestration environment, and then we can configure that service offering to a very fine-grained service offering based on the operator's specific characteristics and attributes. And then what we'll show is the final step is to be able to provision and activate that for a tenant within the operator in a network environment, including adding up and spinning up the value-added services for that tenant. Okay, so one of the key characteristics of an orchestrator is the rapid introduction of new services. In this case, in this example, we're actually using Yang as a means to model the service in a very rich context. So we can go to a very fine-grained, and we can model a very complex service using Yang, and we can decide exactly what capabilities of the network can be exploited in the service offering. So there's a number of steps that are very important from the orchestration perspective. The first step is that we model the service in Yang. As I say, this is the hierarchical service model, and it allows us to model all of the different layers and all the technologies involved in that service. Then we import that Yang into the orchestrator through an import capability. So the orchestrator itself is meta-model driven. It's capable of interpreting the service that's been modeled in Yang. And then we auto-generate a northbound API from the service model which we've just built. So the idea is to avoid manual tasks in this process. You can auto-render, auto-generate, and automatically import into the runtime orchestration the service models. Then we also, in order to connect with the network layer and the resource layer we have for the CloudVPN, we need to configure the mappings to the southbound API. Okay. So this is just going through the various steps. We can show that when we import the Yang into the orchestrator, we convert it into an internal model representation. Then we map that into the southbound, into the network and the resource layer, and this is essentially what the service offering in this demonstration consists of. So we talk about the service that transits from the branch site across the IP RAN and the IP core. It uses a layer 2 VPN, it uses a layer 3 VPN in the IP core, and then in the data center we'll be running certain value-added services. So there's a lot of characteristics, attributes, specifications that need to be set up inside of the service definition and template. And what we try to do is we configure the service in the access, we have some common specifications for the VPN service itself, and then we have domain-specific specifications for both the layer 2 VPN and the layer 3 VPN. Okay. Finally then, once we've got the connectivity in place, which is what the previous slide was showing, we are talking about how we actually design the service components that make up the virtual network functions. So the functions and the applications we want to give to the operator. So in this case, we're talking about a virtual firewall and a virtual DHCP that will run in the data center. So we're going to connect the corporate sites to the data center where the services are actually running, the value-added services. Okay. And this again is done in a model-driven approach. This was done in conjunction with a partner who provided that capability. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay. So the Tenant Cell service is then the final goal for this, and effectively to make it very point-and-click capability for the tenant to be able to turn up and add new sites for the tenant. So if a tenant wants to create a brand new site in a different city or a different location, basically they should have a very simple way of adding new sites and adding the applications for that tenant to the thing. Okay, so now we'll take a look at the demonstration of the CloudVPN, the end-to-end service, and I'll take you through the different steps. So the first step is to look at the cross-domain configuration. So what we're doing is we're setting up a cross-domain parameters for the VPN service. In this example, I've already imported the service definition as we described in the presentation earlier. So I'm creating a Layer 2 VPN plus a Layer 3 VPN common attributes for the service and common specifications for those services. So this is very helpful in reducing the amount of configuration you need to do for the individual domains. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to choose is the type of topology we want in the network. I'll choose the service type, it's MPLS in this case, and the total bandwidth that we're looking to create on the service itself. Okay. Next, I'm going to add the address pool and where the address pools for the IP addresses come from. And then I'm going to configure the CIOR and other parameters that are relevant for the service. So I can do this to a very fine-grained approach. It's basically down to what I expose within the service model and my templates for the service definition itself. Okay. So in this case, I'm setting the upper bandwidth threshold for the service. And now I'm going to configure the protection mode for the service. So in this case, I'm not going to choose any protection mode. I will just leave it for the moment. Okay. And then finally, in this demo, what I'm going to provide is the routing constraints, and I'm going to choose the shortest path constraint for the policy. Obviously, I have a number of different options I can choose for that. Okay. So that's the configuration of the cross-domain policies. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at defining a single domain policy. So this is where you take those cross-domain policies, but you further refine them for the individual domains, so for the IP RAN or the IP core. And in this case, I will actually inherit quite a lot from the common cross-domain specifications. So I'm choosing a point-to-point Layer 2 VPN for the IP RAN, and then I'm going to default a lot of these parameters for the IP RAN take them directly from the common configurations. Now I'm moving on to the IP core, and I'll do the same. I'll specify some characteristics that are specific to the IP core, in this case full mesh and IPv3 or Layer 3 VPN. And then I go through. So now basically what I've done is I've configured a lot of the characteristic specifications that make up my service. So I'm ready now to create the cross-domain and validate the cross-domain service. So what I'm doing is I will choose a customer, I will choose the Layer 2 and Layer 3 VPN cross-domain capability, and I will do create. So now I'm into the service provisioning steps of for the service. I'm going to add a site and configure the Layer 3 VPN for that site. And this is in the IP core. I'm setting up the different parameters I need, which are customer specific. So I'm setting up the static routing for the customer, Layer 3 VPN. So that's the IP core now, configuration now set up. And then I'll move on to the IP RAN Layer 2 VPN configuration. So I'm setting the VLAN ID. I'm also specifying the IP address and port for the CE. Now I've got the two configurations established for both domains, and I'm going to calculate the route options between the two domains. Okay. So what it's done here is it's actually calculated the options for me. I can now see that I have my IP core connected to my IP RAN over a link that connects these two domains. So now we're ready with this service to provision and activate that service. You'll just see here before I do that, you can see there are different link options. The system has discovered the link options that can connect these two domains effectively. So in this network, it's got two options. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to activate this service. So we're going to activate the VPN. You can see we've the layer 2 and layer 3 service activated, and here it goes up, so we can see that the status of the service is now up. Okay. So now we have a real service up and running for the connectivity, and we've connected the customer sites together. And now what we want to do is the value-added service. So now we've got the connectivity. Now we need to add the firewall and the virtual DCP service. Okay. Okay. So this again, adding the VAS is using a template-based, model-driven approach, where we have modeled out the different virtual functions and the function chains within the template. And now what we're doing, first we need to create a virtual data center in which we can run this for the customer. So we create a virtual data center, we activate the data center for the customer, and then what we do is we want to go ahead and create an instance of that data center for that customer. So in this case, we're using Huawei's solution for this. But again, the system is agnostic and can work across any vendor system, this demo as well. So we're deploying that data center, and we also are showing that we've two virtual machines working here, virtual instances working for that. So with two VNFs, and we've got the virtual firewall and the virtual DHCP working for that customer. Okay, so then finally we can query the system, we can understand what the performance of the virtual instances are. The last step in this is that now we've got all this infrastructure set up, everything's ready to go. We should be able to provide a simple tenant-based view for the CloudVPN service in which the tenant themselves can actually configure new sites and add new sites. Okay, now that we've shown that how we can introduce a new service type, service offering, we can now show an example of a tenant portal where the tenant can quickly and easily configure their service offering. So the first thing the tenant will do is he'll choose to add a new site for their existing service. In this case, we're adding a site in Beijing, and we're specifying the minimum parameters that we need for that to connect to that site, basically. Okay. So through this type of portal, we can expose whatever we want the tenant to be able to configure themselves. That can be a lot of information or a small amount of information. Okay. So in the next step, we're going to show how we create the virtual data center for this site. In this case, again, we're configuring the virtual data center instance, and then we're setting up the subnet to connect the various sites to the data center itself. Okay, so now we've got a number of virtual machines running in the data center, and they're connected to the sites. Our next we deploy the site to site and the site to DC VPN service for that customer. That means activating that site into the network. Okay. So here we can see a graphical view of the two sites that are connecting to the data center. So the corporate environment is now set up for the customer itself. Okay. Okay, so we've instantiated that service for the customer. Now we're going to add the virtual DHCP and the virtual firewall service for that customer. Okay, so we're going to specify some parameters in relation to the DHCP and the IP addresses and the gateways, etc. And then we're also going to do something where we submit and provision the firewall and the DHCP service. Okay? And that really completes it. So we can decide exactly how much granularity we want to give to the tenant in order to configure their service, so we could keep it very high level, and this is all part of the power of the model-driven approach for the service modeling within the orchestration. Thank you very much. We're delighted to be able to share this at the OPNFV event. Thank you.